It's okay. Leaders of the people. In this election year, I'm holding up 3 people who exemplify leaders of the people. These are ones who become leaders, not because they are disliked less than the others whose names voters recognize on a ballot. Rather, they lead by acting in such a way that masses of people, whole nations, want to follow them. Maybe they will later win elections, but they were already leaders before that. Forgive me for choosing 3 men, for women have rarely had much of a chance to become leaders of masses of nations. So the first of these 3 is Che, Ernesto Guevara. If you've seen the movie Motorcycle Diaries, and if you haven't, treat yourself to it, then you know something about the youth who swam across the Amazon late at night, wheezing with asthma, so that he could spend his 24th birthday with the lepers. This was a man who, when asked by Fidel at the triumph of the revolution to stay on and help create the new Cuba, agreed but said he must be free to leave whenever he felt he was needed in some people's uprising elsewhere. This is the internationalist who claimed he was not Argentinian, but rather Latin American, and who became a man of the whole world, from Harlem to Ireland to Vietnam and more. Cuban school children are taught, be like Che. They learn to be like Che, who in the last letter to his children told them, quote, always be capable of feeling deeply any injustice committed against anyone, anywhere in the world. This is the most beautiful quality in a revolutionary, end of quote. There is so much more I could say about Che, but I don't have an hour. Fidel Castro Ruz, the second leader I'm holding up, was probably the world's most loved elected leader of his time, at least outside of that controlled by the corporate media. Even a 1960 declassified US State Department memo acknowledged, quote, the majority of Cubans support Castro. The lowest estimate I've seen is 50%, end of quote. At the same time, I was reading that Reagan never attended church for security reasons. I was cherishing a photograph of Fidel immersed in a crowd of Cuban people. And in Estela Bravo's documentary, Fidel, The Untold Story, we see him welcomed by immense cheering crowds in nation after nation, continent after continent. If you haven't seen this doc, treat yourself. When a riot happened in Havana with angry people smashing windows, did Fidel send in the police or National Guard? No, he jumped in a car and had the driver take him to the scene of the riot and walked up to the rioters. They immediately got quiet. And their president did what true leaders of the people do. He listened to their grievances. There are those who call him a dictator because he was elected president of Council of State for so many decades. But he is one of the reasons I disagree with term limits. If people want to keep re-electing a person because he or she is simply the most knowledgeable and the most wise, the most capable and the most dedicated to the people, why should they be forced to vote in someone else? My third person I'm holding up today as a leader of the people is, well, let's go way back. Anyone know Salah ad-Din, Muslim leader and defender of Jerusalem from the so-called Christian Crusader? If you've seen the movie Kingdom of Heaven, and if you haven't, treat yourself to it. If you've seen the movie, you'll remember when Orlando Bloom's character says to the victorious Salah ad-Din something to the effect of, you mean you're letting us go even though when we originally conquered your people, we slaughtered them? And Salah ad-Din answers something to the effect of, we're Muslims, we don't do that. I had already loved Salah ad-Din before seeing the movie or reading Destiny Disrupted, A History of the World Through Islamic Eyes. But Tamarin Ansari's description of him is better than anything I could write. So I'll just share you part of it. share with you. He was a man of slight build, this Salahuddin. He had a pensive air and melancholy eyes, but when he smiled, he could light up a room. Charitable to the point of penury, he was humble with the humble, but majestic with men of might. No one could intimidate him, yet he never stooped to intimidating anyone over whom he had power. As a military leader, he was okay, but nothing special. His power ultimately lay in the fact that people simply adored him. How's that for a role model for all who want to become leaders of the people? Make people love you. No campaign funds can buy that for you, nor can any military or police force bestow it on you. Be what the people love. Be like Shay. Be like Fidel. Be like Salah ad-Din.
I've known about Luis's writing for a long time, and I remember reading something that someone wrote, and there are parallels to writers that came from London and writers that came from Los Angeles. I think that those two cities are so spread out and have so many neighborhoods and so many stories happening in each of them, that you can have people, right? You can have people in Los Angeles like Christopher Isherwood and Joan Didion and Raymond Chandler talk about these neighborhoods and these parts of the city, and you wouldn't necessarily even know that they have anything to do with each other. It's so spread out. But they communicate their life and their experiences. And I think Luis's writing is exactly that. It's communicating so clearly, from the prose that he writes to the poetry, his experiences, and it brings you in to be able to experience it yourself. And Luis, I saw you with a spoken word piece years ago with Perla Bataya, and I think it was for grand performances, maybe. And it was so moving, and it was great to see so many people be able to experience your work. So I'm glad that you were able to be involved with our George Regas event, and I'm really glad to have you here this morning.
Well, thank you, Rick. Thank you all. I'm really honored to be here. And I have a lot to say, but I don't want to tax you all. What I want to do is tell my part of my story to kind of convey my points. I want to though greet you all in several languages. First of all, good morning, buenos dias. But I want to bring in some indigenous languages because they say a lot more about the connection we have. One, Kuali Tonali, which is in Nahuatl, which is, is the language of a good part of Mexico, original language of Mexico. And Nahuatl is a language that if you spoke it, you would be killed. And yet there are more than 1 million speakers in Mexico that still can hang on to that language. And we are teaching it in LA to our young people. I also want to greet you in a Mayan language from the Yucatan, Enlakesh Halakan, which means you are the other me and I am the other you. A beautiful concept. I love that. And they greet people like that because they want to remind themselves that we are together. We are each other. We are the mirror to each other. Something like namaste, that the light in me sees the light in you, that kind of thing. And the other one would be from the Tarahumara of Chihuahua, and it's the greeting Guiraba. And Guiraba means we are one. And it's a beautiful way to greet people. Just a reminder, no matter our differences, no matter that we're two individuals, no matter what it is, we are one. We are one with everything. And I find that to be better greetings in many ways, even though nothing wrong with good morning. But I think there's something about reminding us that we are connected with everything and everyone. So I want to start that way because I think my talk was in a time of crisis, it's a time for rebirth. And it's a concept, but it's also very indigenous. And just so you know, my spiritual practice is Native American, Native Mexican. I've been doing this for over 30 years. I started to recover. I had, if you guys know my story from, if you ever read Always Running, my memoir, or It Calls You Back, those are my two memoirs. You'll know that I was on heroin for 7 years as a teenager. And then I drank for 20 years on top of that. So for 27 years, I was in a terrible state of fog. And I've been now sober for 29 years. And it's been amazing and great. It's been a journey. It's been hard. It's been all those things. But one of the things that keeps me sober, even though I've gone to NA meetings, AA, I've gone to rational recovery meetings, I've done a lot of that work, but it's Native American spiritual practices. That's what I do. And, you know, I don't proselytize, I don't convert people. It's just what I do. And I got into it when I was in Chicago, and I was working with the people out of the Native American Center there, including the Mexicas, the Aztec dancers and communities that were developing there in Chicago. And they introduced me to the Sweat Lodge as a recovery path. So I've been on that road. We call it the Red Road. About 25 years ago, my wife was adopted by a Navajo elder and his wife on the res there in Lucachucay, Arizona. And we've been their family ever since. So every year, for almost every year, we were going there for ceremony and family time. And I'm actually going there this Monday. It's been a whole week there. We're going to drive all the way. We're going to get to Phoenix and we're going to drive 5 hours to the res, spend time with our family there. Once they adopt you in the old, the name way, you are their family. We're not, they don't consider us adopted. We are family. My wife has got brothers and sisters there, and we've been very close to them. So I just mentioned all that to say this is my spiritual practice. But I love really all ways that people connect to the divine. I don't think there's a better way. I think there's all powerful ways. People find their ways to do it, and I support that. I mentioned that so that you would know what I'm going to start with. And what I'm going to start with is a book that my last book that came out, I don't know if you can see it, it's called From Our Land to Our Land. Came out in 2020 just as the pandemic hit. And the LA Times gave it a book of the month. We thought we were going to go all over the country pushing it. The pandemic hit and killed it. I couldn't go nowhere. We couldn't push it. But I think it's one of the most important books I've ever written. I've written 16 books, and this is the book that didn't get the attention. But it starts with a story about my mother having me born in El Paso, Texas. And the story was that we lived in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. I never lived in El Paso, but my dad was already having trouble with the political, I guess, environment there. They were going after him. He ran an elementary school, and they wouldn't give him any money for the school. And what he had to do was sell the iron grating around the school to get supplies. And they arrested him for it. And because he was imprisoned. And when he got out of jail, he says, I'm leaving Mexico. And he loved Mexico. It's all he is, all he knows. But the politics in those days, and this is when the PRI was running things, you know what I'm saying? It's different politics now, but the PRI at that time was going after certain people. He was very upset. So all my mom's kids with my dad, there's 4 of us, were born in El Paso, and my youngest sister was born in East LA. Now, I mentioned that because you crossed the international bridge to have me born from one country to another country. But the ground that she was on is the Chihuahuan Desert. Anybody know anything about the Chihuahuan Desert? It's the largest desert in North America. It's beautiful. It's got all kinds of terrain. It's also the land of the Tarahumara people. They call themselves the Raramuri. And anybody knows anything about the Tarahumara, you know they're famous for being great runners. In fact, their name means fleet-footed people. And they started getting into marathons and beating everybody. I think the only ones that they can't beat is the Kenyans. I don't think anybody can beat the Kenyans when it comes to running, but the Tarahumara is right up there. And my mother's family is Tarahumara. And I'm really glad that I know that, because most Mexicans don't know their tribal roots. Even if we look indigenous, even if we have indigenous customs, sometimes we don't know what tribes we're from. My mother, bless her, would always tell us, somos Tarahumaras, we are Tarahumaras. That was very important. I didn't know who these people were, but I was very interested. In fact, in my family, I think I was the only one that sat around and asked my mom, who are these people? Tell me their story. None of my brothers and sisters had that any interest. I did. She told me some great stories, but one of the stories was that my great-grandmother and my grandmother, when she was younger, were starving during the Mexican Revolution, and they ended up coming from the Sierra Tarahumara is right there where the Copper Canyon is. If anybody knows that area, I've been there. I know the people, I know the land, it's beautiful. They're very Tarahumara there. They still speak their language, have their customs, they sing their songs, they have drums, they do dances, they're very beautiful. Even if it's mixed with some Catholic stuff, it's still very much Tarahumara. My grandmother and great-grandmother came down from Sierra to get some food in Chihuahua City. But what happens is the church will kidnap them. And that's what happened. A lot of these Indians came down and never got back. And that was my story about my grandmother, great-grandmother. The church, well, the way it doesn't just rope you in. They bring you in, they give you food, they give you shelter, and then they start changing you. They give you the Tarahumara dress, which is really a Catholic print dress. They change your name and you can't use your language. But they give you food and they take care of you and they won't let you leave. So the story was that my mom was born in this city called Chihuahua City, and she was born in a ghetto that to this day they call La Tarahumara. It's the ghetto of de-Indianized Tarahumara people. And I will tell you just really, this is an important part of the story. My mom didn't go traditional Tarahumara, but she knew she was, and they were all Catholicized. But I've been in that ghetto. If you go to the Sierra, where the Tarahumaras live traditionally, they're some of the healthiest people in the world. Duke University, UCLA, others have gone and studied them. They have no heart disease. They have no diabetes. They walk for hours because the Sierra is up to 7,000 feet, and they walk to get to their little villages or whatever they have to do. There's 80,000 of them, at least when I was visiting, that was living in caves. They're one of the few cave dwellers in the world that's still there. And they are very much into their own crops, which are the three sisters, corn, squash, and beans. They don't eat meat that much except in the winter. They have goats and hogs that the Spanish brought, but they only use them to fertilize their fields. They're very healthy and very strong, and they're traditional. They speak their language. I was there, there's no electricity, there's no potable water, but they live very healthy and very rich in that sense. But once you go to the ghetto, La Tarahumara, they're alcoholics, they're diabetics, they got heart disease, they beat their wives and kids. They are the civilized Indians. You see what I'm saying? They're the ones that got civilized. And that my mom grew up in that environment. And I mentioned that because even though she told us we're Tarahumaras, she also told us, I don't know my people. I don't know my traditions. So I made an effort to go and find out, to spend time there. And to me, it's important because this has to do with this crisis that we're in Los Angeles. When I was there, and I'll tell you this one story, and I'll get into what I'm going to talk about. The one story was I was there in the Tarahumara land, in the Sierra Tarahumara, among the traditional people, and they don't talk to you. They call you a name called Chabochi, which means stranger. And unless you're actually from there, they won't talk to you. They call you Chabochi. And actually, Chabochi is a name they call the Spaniards. And it actually means face full of webs, because they had all these beards. And so, but now it's a word for any stranger. So they would call me Sabochi, and I didn't know what it was. And my friends would tell me, well, that means you're a stranger. So what I told them is, listen, I know I'm a stranger, but I'm not. I'm actually one of you. My mother is from this tribe. and I want to find out my heritage. I want to find out about these people. And they were extremely surprised. And they were quite happy, but they were like so surprised because you know what they say? Many have left and nobody comes back. They were surprised that I came back and was interested to know about them. And they opened up all their doors. They were the most beautiful, embracing people. I was in tears half the time. They were so embracing of me, and they don't have to. I don't know, I'm not from there, but they were so happy to know that I was interested about my tribe. You know what I'm saying? And so I bring that in because that's why I do Native American things. And here in the United States, I spent a lot of time in Pine Ridge among the Lakota. I had elders there. I did ceremony there. And then I started hanging out with a lot of people in Kansas City and Oklahoma, Muskogee Creek people that were friends. And then I ended up going to the Navajo Res, spending many, many years there. And then, of course, my family got adopted, my wife. And then when I come back to LA, I was living in Chicago for 15 years. I came back. We did a lot of work here among the indigenous communities here. And one of them, this is what gets to what we're talking about. One of them is the Oaxacan community, which, you know, it's very big here in LA. It's huge. They're mostly Zapotecos, Mixtecos, and other peoples from Oaxaca. They're very indigenous. They still speak their language. And I've been to Oaxaca. It's a most magical place. It's the most beautiful, magical place. So when these three Latinos were in that room talking, they expressed anti-Black sentiment, which is awful, anti-LGBTQ sentiment, they even attacked Jews and Armenians, you know? But they also talked about Oaxacans in a terrible way. And so I think that this kind of opens up a bigger can of worms, if you want to say, that racism and even white supremacy is not a problem for just white people. It permeates all of us. It becomes part of our family DNA. And I know in Mexicans, there is some issues, colorism, as they call them, where the lighter you are, the more love there is for you. And if you're darker, the people talk about you. If you go out in the summertime and you get darker, some people will say, get back in, don't get too dark. You know how that goes. These are things that in Mexican families, people would say. I had one of among all the Tarumaras of my family in Chihuahua, my grandfather had blue eyes. He was brown skinned, but he had blue eyes. Can you imagine? Beautiful. It looked beautiful to everybody. But he was what we call the consentido. You know what that means? The one everybody loved. Because he had blue eyes, he had these light eyes. All these brown-skinned, brown-eyed people were nothing compared to my blue-eyed grandfather, who was actually, according to my mom, a very terrible person. He was an alcoholic. He used to beat my grandmother and pull her through the house by her hair. He was a terrible person, but they all loved him because he had blue eyes. You see what I'm saying? That colorism, the idea that lighter skin and is better no matter what than darker skinned people is in all our cultures. And it's colonialism. It comes from the conquest, from the Spanish coming in, the caste system they introduced in Mexico, which still permeates. The idea that if you're from Europe, you're more valued, all the way to the darkest person, and the worst person was a Black person. The Indians were next, and mixed, and they had all these mixed people. They had names for every kind of mix, and they were given a scale. That's where the word cholo comes from. Cholo, we talk about cholos here in LA, and we say, well, they're cholos, they're gangsters, they're the bald-headed gangsters with tattoos. We make fun of them. There's even TV shows on Hulu. They have a TV show making fun of cholos and everything. But cholo is a word that means you're mostly Indian with some Spanish. And it was part of the caste system. I mention all this because this is ingrained in us. This is taught to all of us. In Mexico, there is a large, I guess you would call Afro-Mexican population, and people ignored them, discriminated against them. If you were Afro-Mexican, you were treated badly. And They couldn't say, or they weren't proud to be Black. Only recently that they start saying they are proud of being Black. And only recently that Mexico as a country began to recognize them. It never would recognize them before, and now they've included them in census. So they found out there's actually quite a not large number of Afro-Mexican people, mostly from Guerrero and Oaxaca and Veracruz. So this is important. Mexico, for the first time, started recognizing 68 official languages. They used to have one language, Spanish. Now they recognize 68. And they also know that there's probably 360 languages and variants in Mexico. So I mention all this to say that the important way to deal with anti-Blackness, anti-LGBTQ, anti-Indigenous, all these things is to understand and be aware of the complexities of who we are and to recognize and appreciate this is what makes us who we are. I'm proud to say that I'm Tarahumara, I'm Indigenous. I go to Sweat Lodge now. I have a recovery Sweat Lodge that I go every month with me and my son. We have to say what tribes we're from, even if we don't know. We actually didn't grow with them. So we have Native American tribes here, but we also have a lot of Chicanos. And we ask the Chicanos, find out from your family, what part of Mexico did you come from? So you would know. So we would recognize the original peoples. You know what I'm trying to get at? To recognize what you're from. So we don't carry this idea that I'm part of this caste system. I don't call myself mestizo. You heard this word a lot. It was used to discriminate against darker skinned people. I don't use that word because mestizo was just below the Criollo Spanish. The Spanish from Spain were more valuable. The Spanish that were born in the New World were less valuable. And then the mestizo was a mixture of Indian and Spanish. And then you got Afro mestizo. I don't use those terms because it's the caste system terms. I am a full, complete human being. And that all of us are. No matter what race or anything you have in you, we are full, complete as we are. But at the same time, it's good to know what our original people are. So, and I want to read a poem because this is partly a very important part of me, is to point out that before the capitalist system came, which was built on colonialism, there wouldn't be capitalism without them going into Africa, into India, into China, and into the so-called Americas. There wouldn't be capitalism. They built them on the colonial system. The stealing of land, the stealing of gold and silver and other mining of people, but also the destruction of the indigenous people of all those lands. But one of the things that human beings would always do was migrate. Migracy is a human condition. We migrated to better lands. When there was a famine in one place, we migrated where there wasn't. We migrated to follow animals. We migrated to migration, starting from Africa all the way, human beings have been migrating all across the world. The whole world was our nation. You understand what I'm saying? Our earth, Mother Earth, it wasn't about a fatherland, it was about a Mother Earth. Mother Earth embraced all of us, didn't care about race or your gender recognition. It just loved you all. You know what I'm saying? It embraced us all. And this is why I always talk about Mother Earth, is where I'm really the most important part. People created a fatherland to create nation states, which was done to create home markets, especially as capitalism developed. Now we got all kinds of borders. Some of them had nothing to do with tribal peoples. Supposedly they made borders to include different peoples with different common cultures and common languages, but they got them all mixed up. This whole thing with Ukraine and Russia is all these lands and nations, states that were created out of peoples that had a lot of commonality and differences. And now people are killing each other. You know how many people die because of borders? Made up things. Borders are totally made up. So we're imprisoned in this world by their nation state. And you know how important this is? Because that means if you have a famine in some country, wherever it is, Africa somewhere, you can't leave your country, you have to starve. Or you become a refugee and then starve as a refugee. You know, so this is where we've destroyed the natural thing that human beings do, was interact with each other, was go from one place to the other. we've stopped that, and now we create this nation state. So I'm going to read you this poem, and it's based on a song by the Texas, the Tejano accordion player named Flaco Jimenez. He came out with a song called Seguro que Hell Yes. And for those that don't know what that means, in Mexican Spanish, I guess in any Spanish, we say seguro que yes, seguro que sí, which means sure yes, really strong emphasis on yes. Or we say claro que sí, which means of course yes. Or we can say verdad que sí, truthfully yes. In other words, just gives an emphasis. Well, you can imagine seguro que hell yes means a really strong yes, real adamant double yes. So I'm going to read you the poem, and it's about this migration. It's dedicated to all the migrants, and I'm one of them, because again, when my mom had me born, she went from our land to our land. She crossed the border, but it was still our land. You understand? I'm not an immigrant. I'm not. That land, our people have been there for tens of thousands of years. Somebody created a border when I was born. It was only 173 years, that border. But it's still our land. So let me read you the poem. It goes like this. We have passed this way before, laden with sod, skeleton tongues marking the dark. We have eaten of this dust. We have scraped it off our faces. We have dreamed this wound, this world of vileness tantas veces that it's a song beneath our breathing. Seguro que sí. We knew it was coming before it came. Ya hemos pasado por este camino. And venom eyes greet us, taunting mouths greet us. The most rooted people of the land are the most revered and the most despised, making us myths, even as Mother Earth daily births us. We cross many borders and cross into ourselves. This America that Emerson called a poem is a barbed wire. Our sweat, our blood, and the lágrimas shed for thee are fashioned into a prison. Freedom for some is slavery for me. Whenever they lie, a part of us is murdered. This we know, and our children cannot let it be. This we know, and we challenge our skins to take it on. This we know because we have passed this way before. Es seguro que sí, cactus bedding at our feet, snake curling through our limbs. Ya hemos pasado por este camino, and we can never stop coming. The desert calls us, the fire-scarred trees, the dried bones of elders, the silent screaming of stones. They call us back, and we come because we have died so many times to the sun, because we belong to the rivers wild, because we never feared the blue in the eye, the green in the heart, the shearing laws and guns and lies, because we dreamed all of this. And then now we are awake to dream again. Seguro que hell, yes. So thank you. I just want to emphasize the value of our origins and who we are, and also that history that has separated us, fractured us, got us fighting not just each other, but ourselves. We're in an internal fight. Racism and all these issues cause us fighting ourselves. Suicide rates among Black children is higher than any other group of people. Why should this be? People who aren't appreciated, revered, understood, cared for will learn to hate themselves. And I want this to be understood, because this is why we have the violence in our streets. There's a lot of self-hate running around. And I think it's important people to understand. People say, well, the kids are killing themselves. Black on black crime, brown on brown crime. There's a lot of self-hate. You know I was in a gang. You know my story. I shot people. I stabbed people. I was in those wars. Why? I killed people, or tried to kill people. I actually never killed nobody, but I tried to kill people that looked like me. Who put us in that paradigm? And I'm not trying to say there's no personal responsibility. I took personal responsibility. I decided to turn against that. I fought for 50 years. I fought for a body of peace in LA. I tried to bring in all these neighborhoods fighting each other. I started 50 years ago with others. It was undermined by the sheriffs and the police. They were our biggest enemy. They killed 3 or 4 of our leaders from this group that we were working with. We had to stop it because we couldn't even meet. The police themselves did drive-bys to instigate gang warfare. I'm not making this up. I have it in my book, but as you know, the sheriff's deputies have been found out to have done that. They've arrested in 93, they arrested the Vikings gang of the Linwood Sheriff Station for doing that. And now all these other gangs, the executioners, the banditos, they've been doing this for a long time, instigating gang warfare. They would get one kid from one rival neighborhood, and this is Black and brown communities, and drop them off in rival neighborhoods to start gang warfare. Those kids could be shot, stabbed, or killed. Police will do this. Our own police that got tax dollars. In America, in the United States, this is not Mexico, this is not Ciudad Juarez, this is US LA. They're still doing it. And so this is why I stand with all my brothers and sisters and all these families that say, we have to reimagine the police, we have to reimagine our politics, we have to reimagine city councils, we got to reimagine who's governing us and how. We have to, as the young people say, we have to reset everything. We have to build a new foundation because that old foundation is old and falling apart. We need a new foundation for a new house. I don't think it's about just destroying the old house and all we do is walk around in ruins. I think it's about thinking about a new foundation of equity and embracement and true love of each other, and the words of the indigenous people, we are one, Vida Loca, to use that as a foundation to build a new house that does not have the poverty because there's no place for poverty, does not have people homeless because there's no place for homelessness. We have a country and a society and a system that's okay with all that. It's not okay. It's all made up stuff, you understand? There's no basis for it except for the capitalist system that is made up itself, based on colonialism, based on racism, based on all these things that we know. And I think that this is our time to take that crisis and look at the birth that's trying to come through. Crisis is about death and birth. Something's trying to die, something's trying to be born. Let's see what needs to die and make sure we can help rebirth that new world that we're all striving for, that we're all struggling for, that we're all trying to be a part of. I really want to end with those words and open it up to you, because I do feel that this is the time to talk about this and use that crisis in the city council, which right now is paralyzed the whole city council. We have no governance right now. And I don't got nobody to blame except them. The people that we voted to represent us stopped representing us. They bought into the system. They bought into the white supremacy. They bought into all the lies. And now we have to stand up and say, no, we're not gonna do that. We're not gonna accept that. But can we create something new? What's being born? Let's help that baby be born. Let's be the midwives for a new world, a new society, and a new city, and a new state, and a new country. That's, I think, where we're at. Otherwise, we're gonna keep holding on to the old things. We're gonna keep fighting the same old battles. Even the elections now coming up in November, same old paradigms are being fought there. It's possible the Republicans are gonna win over Congress again. This is the mess. We got the pendulum swing, and we can never find our freedom, never find our equilibrium, because we're constantly fighting the old ways of doing things. So we need to reimagine and then begin to organize along those lines. So I want to leave you all with that and open it up to you with your questions, comments, and to see how far we can go. And I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That resonated so much. It was so topical too. When you got to talking about the Oaxacans, my brain was just going, yes, yes, yes. Thank you. That was remarkable. Now, the way that we do our questioning is people raise their hand using the little raise hand thing in the on the on the menu, and one hand has already gone up, in fact, I see. And then I will call on people. Oh, okay, we have two hands up actually, but I'll start with Fernando. Fernando, would you like to put your question or comment? Thank you.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Luis, for your presentation. You know, I really agree with you in many aspects. You know, one of my concern is that this colonialism is really destroying us. We have a systemic problem here in this country. We have 3.5 million in prison at this point, and another 3 to 5 million people in and out in a court or jail system. And so we have a huge problem. But I do agree that this colonialism is really destroying us. And it's like I'm trying to find a solution to this urgent problem that we face as a people. And I'm a Filipino myself. The same problem that we have. I just came from vacation 2 months, and the suffering of the people, the condition there is really needs some attention if I can. But if you can, I don't know how to put the word, but this systemic problem is destroying us. And I agree that your point on many aspects of organizing and so forth is I would say it's affected, but at this urgent moment, we have now prison being paid at least 30 cents an hour. It's really like a slavery at this point. Maybe you can collaborate a little bit more. Maybe let's just put it, how do we resolve some of this urgent problem? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll come back to that answer, I think, later, because we do have some more hands up now.
Okay.
I just wanted to read a chat from Grace because she had to leave. She wrote, "Thank you very much, Poet Luis. You have refreshed our souls and reminded us of the ways we all fall into the traps of racism. We need to use this moment in LA history to bring all this to light. Thank you so much. My apologies, I have to leave now for another meeting," which I think was lovely. And Elizabeth Gonzalez has dropped the link to Tia Chucha's online bookshop, so you can buy Luis's books, which is a great thing to do. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And anyway, having said that, we do have a few other hands up. Rick, I don't know how you managed it being Zoom host, but I'm impressed. You've got the hand up as well.
Multitasking.
Yeah.
Luis, thank you very much. I just also noticed in the chat, our esteemed chairman has asked maybe for a couple more readings, if you can. So I wanted to ask you specifically about the subject matter that we put in the email blast about talking about the LA City Council issues. And it's interesting because I remember back when we were meeting at Emmanuel Presbyterian Church, where ICUJP usually meets, we had Gil Cedillo come in and he would talk about issues. I'm not sure if Kevin De Leon ever did, but these people have been involved with both of them started out with LA community groups and became political from there. I'm wondering what you think is where the disconnect happened, and maybe some things that people need to watch out for as they make that travail from community to politics.
So Rose, you wanted me to answer after everybody's asked the questions? Is that
Yeah, we have one more hand up, actually. Let's just see what her question is too, just in case you'd like to pull them all together. Sophia? You're muted, Sophia.
Yeah, I also, gracias, Mati Luis. I just wanted to also talk about what was happening with the city council and concerns with the city attorney's proposal to use LA County's redistricting, because the LA County is racist. And as Mexicanos and Chicanos, we sued to have that extra seat. And, we had Democrats vote against that when we have the proportional representation way, to the president. No one came in and, supported that lawsuit when we won it. So I'm really concerned that it's going to be continued divide. And then when talking about proportional representation, when I look at Indigenous people, Mexicanos, Africanos, our relationship to this continent is much different. There was a genocide, and that's why we have treaties. And we deal with discrimination of all peoples, but that historical genocide, we had a different place historically and legally. So sometimes the colonizer will use diversity to lessen those voices. So I want you to talk about that as well. And just, I wanted to bring this to the table because I don't want the counties to then come in again and do the same thing in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. Very good point. Okay, Luis, if you can hold those three things together now, but we can always go backward and forward between the three speakers. I'm not trying to kind of kill you here.
They're all kind of related. So I want to start with Fernando's concern. First of all, Fernando, I think the Filipino and Mexicans have a very affinity because we have a lot of colonial connections there. And in many ways, as you know, Filipinos and Mexicans here in LA have always been very close because of those affinities. We always seem to understand the pain of the Spanish conquest, colonialism, and then especially in the Philippines, the US coming in, colonizing as well. And so with those histories, those layers is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with layers of colonialism, which makes it hard to get through. And many of us don't understand how to get through them because we're just putting our face, our appearance, and not getting to the essence of anything. So I think, first of all, it'd be good to study and learn these colonial layers and where they come from. And it's not about making anybody feel bad. It's about getting to the heart and root of who we are. The root of it is important. You can't really fix anything without getting to the root. I remember in the South, the civil rights activists would talk about being root doctors. They were trying to heal, but they said, get to the root, be root doctors. I love that saying. I still use it. It was very powerful. Let's get to the root of it. So I think that's what Fernando's pointing out to. Let's get to the root of who we are, study critical race theory that everybody's attacking. It's really just truth theory. There's no way to say it. Get to the truth. And people, as you know, are organized to stop the dialogue from going on in our schools and our communities. And we can't get to the root now. Everybody wants to go back to 1776. We go back further. There's deeper things. So that's one thing. We got to get to the root of all this. The root of anti-Blackness, deep. The root of anti-indigeneity, indigenous, deep. LGBT, anti-LGBT, very deep. All these issues, anti-Jewish, deep history. Get to the root of it. So that's one thing. And I also think that it's important that when we talk about the city, why do I think these representatives failed us? I don't think that you can do much in a scarcity system if you buy into the scarcity system. That system is another made up thing. So here we are, Latinos, and sitting there trying to address an issue that's a very real issue that Sophia points out. We're not properly represented in the county or city as Latinos, but you can't play that scarcity game. I'm going to get over by stopping this group or crushing this group. You know what I'm saying? That's the game that was set up and that we all start playing. We have to find ways that allow us to be properly represented. And I think one of the things that they're trying to do, at least in the city, I think is something they should do in the county, is break up these huge districts. There are county districts that are bigger than some states. We have huge areas represented by one people. LA County is the largest county in the country. It's bigger than, I understand, 40 states in the country, just the county. And there's only 5 districts. That needs to be broken up and be more representative of the people. You know what I'm saying? The same thing with the city. The city's huge. We've had 15 districts since the 1920s, when we didn't have the millions of people that we have now. So something has to be done to rearrange, reconfigure all of this so that it is more representative of the actual numbers. I do want to say one other thing. The city, because of development and gentrification, is pushing out the poor, pushing out mostly Black, pushing out a lot of brown people out. This is a big issue. Homelessness is not being addressed at this level, I very rarely. The housing is another scarcity issue that is hurting us because housing was made so hard to get. The developers that developed downtown LA were mostly from New York. Big time developers, they destroyed Manhattan practically. And I say destroyed because you can't live in Manhattan. And then they come out to LA and do the same thing. I think we have to address this because a lot of these council people, especially like Weesar, and it's him in particular, we're buying into these developers. That's why he's going to go to court. You know what I'm saying? These people got bought into the big money. These people are getting away with stuff. And I don't want to say who you should vote not to vote for, but I will say don't vote for developers. They're the ones that cause the problems. And the only way that they can solve the problems is to say, we can't have these big developers come in. I lived in Boyle Heights. I lived in Lincoln Heights. I lived in Highland Park. I had my first house I ever owned was in Highland Park. It was barrio. It was botanicas and taquerias. It was people. I lived on MU 57, beautiful neighborhood, old homes, all raza, all our people. It was beautiful. Go there now. It's boutiques. It's high-end stores. Those houses are over $1 million now. And there's a homeless enclave, I don't know if it's still there, on the LA River of people from Highland Park around the Arroyo Seco. They might have pushed them out. Catmans of people that got pushed out of their homes from Highland Park into the river. This is LA. This is the story that we have to address, but we can't because people are sitting there buying into scarcity. So I want to challenge that. I think we have to have an abundance way of thinking. And I know people aren't going that way, but let's do it. And let's prepare our politicians. Okay, I know Nudie Martinez. She represents a district next to mine here in the San Fernando Valley. She grew up in the same community that my wife Trini grew up, Pacoima. And Trini's been interviewed by the LA Times because they want to know, how does a Chicana from Pacoima think about all this? Because Trini obviously don't think the way Nudie does. But she knows people that think that way, you know. She knows people that grew up that way. And so she has to address what has made us who we are. But we got to prepare our young people to be representing us, prepare them with all this history, all this knowledge, prepare them to be embracing, to include everybody, to have an inclusive way of representing, not this exclusive, I'm going to battle some people for I can get mine. You know what I'm getting at? We're getting caught up in this scarcity world and it's hurting all of us. And we don't know how to fight it, but we need to. But let's stop by making sure that we don't make LA only a place for people with money to live in. It's got to be a place where every one of us can live in. I hope I answered most of the questions. I know it was very, very deep, but I do think we've got to get to the root of everything. All these issues, get to the root of it, uproot all the things. Homelessness has a root. It's the big development, big money. It mixed in with white supremacy and everything else, but it's got that root.
I wanted to add that the first district was chopped up, not to favor Mexicanos. So the other reason the gerrymandering happened was economic advantage, because Gail couldn't handle Lincoln Heights and he didn't want the pushback. That's why he lost his district. So it wasn't only to protect the Mexican solid vote block, it was also based on economic advantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. Carol Francis?
Luis, thank you. This is beautiful. Could you say the name of your people again?
So the Spanish call them Tarahumara. They themselves call themselves Raramuri. You know, they always they couldn't quite say Raramuri, so they call them Tarahumara. But they don't mind you say both. Like the Navajo are really the Dene.
Right.
But you can use both, but they're the Dene. So we're never really called what we're supposed to be called. You know, like
okay. If I want to look it up, what would I look up?
So look up Tarahumara, Tarahumara.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of information on them. They're the largest, they're the second largest indigenous group north of
Really?
Mexico City after the Dene, after the Navajo.
And where are they?
They're in the Chihuahua desert area, and they're mainly confined in the what they call the Sierra Tarahumara, often called the Copper Canyon, which is actually 6 canyons, a system deeper than the Grand Canyon. It's quite
Wow.
deep in that area. Yeah.
Thank you.
Something, Rose, real quick.
Absolutely.
This is a very important part of LA history. Most of these neighborhoods, like Watts, we first moved to Watts when I was 2 years old. That was my community. It was black and brown. And I was there till I was 8 years old. It was a beautiful community. People got along. I don't care what anybody says about how we're fighting each other and anything. We got along very well, black and brown. There was so much interaction, so much caring, friendship. The schools, unfortunately, divided us, believe it or not. When I went to 109th Street School, and they divided us because I spoke Spanish. They would punish us for speaking Spanish. And then the kids were kind of making fun of us because of the way the school set it up. I got slapped across the face by a first grade teacher in front of the whole class for speaking Spanish. And so I think that this division is being ingrained in us. We're not naturally fighting. The Pacoima, where my wife grew up, was black and brown. In fact, in the 70s, it was majority black. And yet there's tensions that are now people are talking about. I lived in the west side of San Bernardino later on, black and brown, west side San Bernardino, you know, Mount Vernon. If anybody knows San Bernardino, it's rough area, rootin' tootin' cowboy town, somebody would call it. It's a rough place, but that west side was beautiful when the people. And I lived in Chicago, and people talk about South Side Chicago, but they forget South Side Chicago is black and brown. The Mexican community starts on the South Side, goes into the other communities that are mostly black. And there's a lot of love and interactions. I get there's tensions. I get that there's people, but I think a lot of those tensions are being by design or brought in from the outside, honestly. I think the prison system in California, the prison system in California inculcated a lot of those divisions and brought them into our community. Because I remember that they started dividing the California prison system by race. You know, the system itself divided racially. And then people started hating each other racially. And then they brought that into our communities because we had so many black and brown people into the prison system. So I think this is by design. I'm not saying there's not real issues we need to address as people, but I do think that most of it is made up about how we don't get along. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Thank you. You know, on a sidebar, I hope you start joining our meetings, 7:30 every Friday. You have such a wonderful attitude and things, and I think you'd really enjoy some of our presenters and our meetings. But anyway, that was beside this point. Anthony has his hand up.
Luis, I loved what you shared. I loved your poetry. And I just wish my wife, Jill, could be here because she actually went to the Tarahumara Indians. She was part of a mission group called Food for the Hungry.
Okay.
And they were bringing medical supplies. And my wife is an evangelical Christian, but not the kind you might think.
I understand. Yeah, I know the difference. Yeah.
So she tells a story where she was going up there and she really loved the people and she bought some of their baskets and stuff, and we have them in her home. But when she went back to the church near where the Tarahumara were living in Mexico, she told some of the people in the church that she was doing this with the Tarahumara, and they said to her, "Why would you do that? They're not human."
Mm.
And it just broke her heart to hear that coming from people who profess to be Christian.
Yeah.
And so I think people of faith, people of the particularly Christian faith, have a lot to work to do to overcome prejudice, because obviously churches are the most segregated communities on Sunday morning in the United States, as I think Dr. King once pointed out. So we need to work on that. And I'm so glad you came here to remind us and to really help us to see how important that Indigenous perspective is. We so need each other. And you're really helping us. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aisha?
Good morning. And thank you for being with us today. When the news broke about the city
Could you
council.
be a little closer to your microphone? It's a little hard to hear you.
Sure, I can do that.
That's it.
Turn all the way up. When the news broke about the city hall conversations, it really felt like a punch in the gut.
Mm.
And it took me a minute to regain my footing. I questioned all the work that people have done from many communities to build coalitions and the sense of solidarity. It just was devastating. And then I saw I'm living in Southgate now, I'm a little bit further from LA, but I saw the immediate response that challenged that just by who showed up, it just challenged this whole notion of every group for themselves. And that was very heartening. So what I wanted to appreciate from you and ask you to talk more about, I think really deep conversations need to happen between all these various groups now to really not just gloss it over and say, oh, that's not us, or that's not really how we treat each other. I think it unearths some wounds or hurt or distrust. And I hope there's a place for getting to the root of it, as you've been talking about, going back to where this came from, and a place for ceremony and culture, ritual to help people and groups really, really move through this and reaffirm their connection. And that's it. Thanks.
Well, I really appreciate that, because that's what the work I try to do. I've been working with multicultural, I don't know what else to call them, interfaith groups for a long time. I think we have to talk to each other. We have so many divisions, we don't know how to talk to each other anymore. And I think it's important for us to just share. And I don't think it's about one person saying there's only one way to go, or I'm the best way, or this is the better way. You know, it's about just sharing and learning to respect each other. You know, one great, beautiful Christian thing about teaching that I love is that when you read Jesus and the teachings, it's quite indigenous, his indigenous teachings in there. You know, it's very indigenous. And one of those things, of course, is love your neighbor as yourself. It's the same thing of in Lakesh. It's the same thing as Guiraba, you know, that we're all in this together. And we have to learn what that means again, that we are one. And maybe we have differences here, maybe we have slight differences there, but we really are in the same boat. We're on this boat called the Titanic. We call it America, you know, but it's the Titanic, and it's either going to sink or it's not. And unfortunately, it's on a sinking wave right now. And we can help build it up, but it's going to take a lot of effort. And that means, again, resetting what we do, reimagining. I love what young people were doing in the last 2 or 3 years. Reimagining, that's powerful. That comes from them. It's like, that's poetic. These young people have wisdom sometimes that us elders forget. And I do think elders have a role, but man, these young people come up with some good stuff. So I agree. I think we're in that space. We need to share, talk, get to the history. And so one other thing I want to add, in the wound, all wounds is the womb, W-O-M-B. In the womb is the possibility of birth. You got to get to the pain. You got to get to that history. This is why I hate it when people say, we don't want to talk about critical race theory. They don't want to get to the womb. We got to get to it in order to get to the new birth that's possible.
Absolutely. Your poetry comes out in everything you say, which brings me now to, I think I said Steve has requested maybe you could read a few more of your poems to us.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful. We'd love to hear a little bit more.
If you don't mind, I can read one now.
That would be great.
And it's a short one, but not relatively short. It's really about my mother. My mother, again, was Tarahumara. And like I said, they're very healthy when they live traditionally. As soon as they come into the ghetto, the Tarahumara, they're in Chihuahua City, they're sick. My mom was so sick. She was obese. She had diabetes. She had thyroid problems. She eventually had cancer. She had everything you can imagine. When she was in her 20s, she lost all her teeth. They rotted away. And so, and then she had this one condition I'm going to read. This poem I was in Watts, one of my earliest memories in Watts. So I think the year was 1959. I was born in 54. So I must have been like 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old. And this is a memory that I'm going to share with you. And it's about my mom. It's called Heavy Blue Veins, Watts, 1959. Heavy blue veins streak across my mother's legs. Some of them bunched up into dark lumps at her ankles. Mama periodically bleeds them to relieve the pain. She carefully cuts the engorged veins with a razor and drains them into a porcelain-like metal pail called a tina. I'm small and all I remember are dreams of blood. Me drowning in a red sea, blood on sheets on the walls, splashing against the white pail and streams out of my mother's ankle. But they aren't dreams. It is mama bleeding into day, into night, bleeding a birth of memory, my mother, my blood, by the side of the bed, me on the covers, and her slicing into a black vein and filling the pail into some dark, forbidding red nightmare, which never stops coming, never stops pouring, this memory of mama and blood and Watts.
Wow. That is powerful. Yes. Anybody else have any questions or comments they need to make, or can we ask Luis maybe read us another poem? Isha, you didn't put your hand down. Have you actually finished speaking? Yeah. Oh, Vida, sorry. Vida's just put her hand up. Vida Veach.
I'm sorry, what I wanted to talk about, I wanted to go back to what Luis said about the scarcity, like the zero-sum game. If you've got something, somebody else doesn't have it. And I think that's not only what's happened to the city hall, but I think it's probably at the root of the white supremacy that we're talking about. Like there's not quite enough for all of us, which is foolish. We have an abundance. And that idea that if you have something, you take away something from me is just ridiculous. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you. Yes, very important. Thank you.
Can we hear another poem? Can we impose upon you?
Yeah, let me do one. And let me do one to the Raramuri, to the Tarahumara. And I'll just read you this poem. It's called Dance or Die. They have this beautiful concept of dance or die. I was there in the Tarahumara land, and they do, during Holy Week, they do a lot of these Catholic and informed marches. And I think it's weird because all these indigenous people with this Catholic stuff, but then they introduce the indigenous in there. So at one point, there's this guy dancing. It looked like he was dancing like he's crazy. I thought he was mentally ill, but they told me he was a Yumari, and Yumari dances for all of them. He does it in the old way. He dances for all the people, and they let him dance during these really solemn processions. And they have this concept, we have to dance or we die as a people. If we don't do our dances, we die. And this is true for the Mexicas and the danza groups and the indigenous, the powwows and all the dancing. They have to dance or they die. So this is the poem, and it goes like this. When the world stops its collective rituals, ignoring the red burn indictments of its wounded and betrayed, when it pushes out the verses of life and holds back the celebrations that mark our staggered steps to awareness, when it impedes the subtle earth incantations plowing over the wild open terrains of the heart, blocking the creative soul death's birthing, when it forces our home, our earth, to become mucus clay to whatever deadly energies can burn through, forcing glaciers to tumble, forests to yield, oceans to churn, when diamonds, gold, oil, cars, and homes too big for 10 families, let alone one, can boom, but respect, dignity, community are hard to come by, then somebody has to dance to keep everything from dying.
Thank you. Sophia, I think you put your hand up again.
Okay, I just wanted to say that the redistricting is happening all over the country, and there's going to be the white supremacy that divides people that are been marginalized. So I just want us to keep in mind the forces we're going to be facing right now when we're trying to do the right thing and call for unity. Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautifully clear at the end. Absolutely. Yes, very, very good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And
Yeah.
you know, just to emphasize the importance of getting out to vote, because they are trying to undermine our vote and our power. But get out there, utilize it. I know it's a very bad space. I know it's rough. I know it's corrupt. I know money's in there, but don't turn over those spaces to the corporations. You know, get out, vote, get out there, run for offices, get out there, do what we can.
Yeah. Steve has his hand up, and then Fernando has his hand up again. So Steve.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I switched to my phone. I had a weak signal on my laptop. Louise, thank you so much. I've been encouraging, and I hope we still have about 20 minutes with you. Maybe you can select one or two more poems. But that's what I want to ask you about. Many of us, if not all of us, are interested in the creative process. You've written 16 books. So you've written in prose, you've written nonfiction. What do you see as the power of poetry as against any other range or type of fiction, nonfiction, art, theater? Why do you dwell and put so much energy into your poetry?
Well, I call poetry soul talk. I think it's one of those language forms that you can get into some deep, revealing soul talk. I mean, you can do it in any form, but you know, I do fiction, and it's inhabited by story. I do scripts. I just did a script. This is inhabited by what you see, visuals and sound and dialogue. All these things inhabit things, but poetry inhabits a language of soul. You got to get deep into something inside of you. The language has to have a lot of imagery that evokes an emotional response, an emotional connection. And I find that to be the powerful thing about poetry. I know some poetry gets into the head. I've read poetry that's not about that, but I love the poetry that really evokes something deep. When I work with I've been teaching poetry and creative writing in prisons for 40 years. And when I go in there and I tell the guys, there's 3 things you need to do. I call it the 3 E's. One is you need to examine, which is a very important part. You know, it's like Socrates is known to say, you know, an unexamined life is not worth living. Examine your life, whatever, good and bad, right or wrong, get to the root of things. And then the second thing I tell them is evoke, but that means like mining the depth, evoking something deep, something soulful, scary, open up to the wounds as well as all the other stuff. Evoke. And then the third thing is expression. How do you say it? How do you say it so others can understand? How do you convey this with artistry? Because that's where the art comes in. And so I use that so that people can see that poetry, it's got all those things. It's got artistry, but it's got depth. I hope I'm making sense. And generally that's what it does. Not that other writers can't do that, but to a poetry, that's really, that's really what it's all about.
Thank you. Somebody else had, Fernando.
Okay, Luis. You know, we are in a very dangerous time at this point. You know, we have a condition here in Ukraine that really scaring the Russian people. You know, we are in a border of Ukraine, which is also very close to Russia. And for the past 30 years, the U.S. has violated many of these Minsk agreement that they signed on with President Gorbachev. You know, that they warn us that we cannot step an inch toward Russia, and I think we have done that so many times. The same thing what's happening here, how the history of this country, how they take the Mexican land from or the Native American lands from them. And I guess your poet has a lot of meanings that how can we contribute the world in terms of really warning us on this Holocaust that can happen, you know. And you see the what the ICE was that ISIS battalion or the Nazis battalion that's happening there in Ukraine, and it's really threatening, you know, the planet Earth. And maybe my question is that how can we because the US is really the one that really creating many of this problem, and how can we contribute in a sense to have peace, because we're going to destroy this planet Earth. So let me just put it that way. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would say just two things on that. One, I think it's very true. The US has undermined the sovereignty of both that whole area, Russia, Ukraine. It has been pushing NATO. It has been doing this for years. What Putin is doing is horrible. What he's doing is terrible. But we've been provoking it. You know what I'm saying? As a country, with NATO, we've been provoking this for a long time. We've been pushing this. And there was an agreement when the Soviet system fell apart that we would not touch these areas, that they were supposed to be, but we undermined all that. Even with the capitalist Russian world, the big money and everything else, we still undermine what we agreed to. But that's true with all agreements. They did it with the treaties with Native America. They did it with everything. Every time we make agreement with anybody, we undermine all of it. And so Ukraine, in many ways, is the terrible things going on in Ukraine is partly our fault. And not to take away that Putin is lost it. You know what I mean? The terrible things. I have friends in Ukraine. Some of them ended up in Mexico because they related to some Mexican. We had a relationship with a Mexican culture center in Mariupol that got invaded, and they had to run out of there. And they had a Mexican culture center because she married a Mexican, and we were related to them, to my culture center here in the valley, Tia Chucha. We were having great relations, and we were going to share, and they were going to try to bring me to the Ukraine. This is before all this stuff. I'm not going down there now. But the point is, we undermine the sovereignties of all these people. And then, of course, Putin is gone completely nuts and how it responds. You know what I'm saying? And the painful thing is, like everybody, there's all these refugees, there's all these, the poor people, the working class, the poor are the ones that suffer. There's other wars that we don't talk about in Eritrea with the Tigray and all that stuff. We're not talking about these. In Somalia, there's been more people killed. We're not talking about other infringes of sovereignty and other things that are going on in the world. So I think this is the sad thing, that our role as a country has not been very good in this country. I was in Central America in the 80s, and I went through all the way to the 90s. We have practically destroyed those beautiful countries. We've made them vassals of the United States. They're so corrupt. The poverty, I was in Honduras for a month working with abandoned kids. I was in El Salvador. I went to 10 prisons there. I was in Guatemala, beautiful indigenous Mayan people. And the US has undermined all their ability to self-govern. US money and US corporations, the big, you know what I'm saying? They have destroyed those beautiful people. And then we wonder why there's violence and war and poverty going on in these places. We're contributing to all these things. And we have to know that there's a role. I'll tell you one other thing. I work with the Mara gangs. Mara Salvatrucha, they talk bad about it, MS-13. I'm gonna tell you something. I work with them. They're like all the gangs. They're Chicanos. They're like us. You know, they grew up in these neighborhoods. They deported them to those countries and brought Chicano-style warfare down to those countries. And now they're doing a lot of terrible things, but I went down there. I helped organize in peace in 2012 between the Mara Salvatrucha and the Barrio 18, the two big gangs there, all LA-based gangs. I organized a peace. The US government and Salvadoran government undermine all the peace efforts. We have 12 peace zones where MS and 18th Street were working together, doing gardening, murals, getting jobs, learning. That I would go in there and talk to them. see what they're doing, walk away, and then the army would come in and arrest everybody. And the US at one point, I was going to speak to the OAS, Organization of American States, and El Salvador about the gang peace. The US stopped everything and said that if I mentioned, this is me, if I mentioned the gang peace, they would pull millions of dollars out of OAS, because OAS depends on US money. And I went down to San Salvador to go speak, and the people pulled me aside and said, you cannot talk about gang peace. If you do, we'll lose millions of dollars. This is because of the US effort. So I'm telling you, it's true what Fernando's saying. We as a country have done some bad things. It doesn't excuse Putin. It doesn't excuse all the corruption in those countries. It doesn't excuse anything. But it does say that we have contributed to a lot of these places, the situations they're in.
Absolutely. And if you come from my country as well, I've got the double guilt. What can I tell you? I spent half my life being ashamed of both my countries.
Yeah.
Anyway, Rick, you had your hand up.
Oh, I think Luis covered it. Just kind of read my mind. Thanks.
Okay, and Luis, I might say you're reading a lot of minds. I mean, looking at the chat, I don't even know who you are, but Sandra's iPad just kind of put a kind of positive comment at you. I mean, you are resonating with us at a degree which is really quite unprecedented in this group. Thank you so much.
Good. And I know somebody brought in Haiti. Haiti is a terrible situation that we have contributed so badly, and we don't take responsibility. There's no accountability. The U.S. has undermined Haiti. And I know, and the Haitians that I know are some of the most beautiful people you ever want to meet. Mm-hmm. And they go through hell. And it's really sad that that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. If there are no more questions, what we do next is we see if there are any kind of notices about affiliate groups, and then we finish up with kind of a closing. A prayer is maybe pushing it a little bit, but a closing kind of feeling to bring us all together. And we would love to have a poem as well at the end, if that's possible. I have sent out a feeler through the chat, but I haven't got a reply yet about the prayer. Maybe it's here now. Let me see what she wrote. Now, okay, I'm going to ask you straight out. Aisha, would you be willing to do the our closing prayer for us today? All right, we'll come back to that. Any other notices of other affiliate reports or other groups that anybody needs to bring up? Carol Francis?
Yes. I just want to say that my book of poetry, or my zine, is in the zine section of the Edendale Library on the corner of Alvarado and Sunset. So anybody wants to go check it out.
Nice, nice. Nothing else then. Okay. Well, we're a little early, but what we do now, Luis, just to let you know, is we lift up people who we know, or situations that we know that we want to all kind of remember. And after we've done that, we come down to our closing benediction prayer, whatever you want to call it. And if you can have a poem prepared, that would be absolutely wonderful. So does anybody want to lift anybody up? Anybody want to think about at the moment?
This is Maggie, and I'd like to lift up the Goldstein family. They've gone through several years of cancer treatment for their father, and he finally passed in what I consider to be the perfect way. The whole family was there, and they were with him when he took his last breath during his passing. And so with all the struggle and strife, that moment was a blessing. And I know I've lifted them up many times during ICUJP.
But that gives us a little closure on it as well, sadly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, though it's urgent that we need to confront the prison industrial complex and the people in Haiti and so forth. But what it's urgent for me is that hopefully lifting up the people, to have peace, because we're going to, particularly the United States, we're going to blow up this planet Earth. And if we don't do anything, uh, it will demise us in this planet Earth. This nuclear bomb is no joke. And so at least for me is that anyone is planning to do peace movement at this point, I'll be joining them if possible. So that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Phil?
Yes, I would like to lift up the memory of Kitty Langston Baragaco, who went by several other names more recently. She grew up here in the Pasadena Quaker community where I grew up, and was a very active with the American Friends Service Committee for, I think, most of her life. And she has died recently, and there will be a memorial service November 12th.
Thank you. Steve?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Many of you know we're up here in Sonoma now to be close to our kids and grandkids. My son-in-law's mother has been caring for her brother, Roger, for months now in his illness. And last week he passed away. It was not unexpected, but very, very sad. And so I lift up Roger today.
Thank you.
I have a friend that is dealing with COVID right now, and her name's Nina. And if you guys can keep her in her thoughts, and also if we can keep ourselves and everybody else in our thoughts, because I think a lot of people think that this has just gone away, and it hasn't. Please think about getting vaccinated and boosted if you can, and just everybody be very careful if you can.
Well, having just had COVID for 2 weeks, I would like to lift up my fellow sufferer who is also undergoing chemo at the same time, who actually gave me the COVID, but that's neither here nor there. So I'd like to lift her up. Her name is Jan, and she's dealing with both chemo and COVID.
I would like to lift up the world, and I was going to tag off of what Fernando and for what everyone has said about just the unity and the peace coming together, especially with the leaders coming together, releasing the ego, and know that to save the world, it's peace power.
Thank you. Aisha has very graciously accepted my invitation to do our closing prayer. So I think what I'll do is I'll ask Luis to do the poem first, and then Aisha, would you kind of close us out? Is that okay?
Okay, so I'm going to share a poem that I had to use in a prison in Mexico. I was there to talk to all these guys, and in the prison, the warden had never walked inside the prison before. I was talking to about 200 guys. Then the warden shows up, and I was doing really good with them, but then the guy stood up and didn't even want to listen to me. They started to assault the warden, like all these, talking about there was no food, no workshop, nothing to do. And I felt that they were going to kidnap us. And these guys were drug cartel guys. So it was heavy duty, and I felt it. And I didn't have any way to fight them. I didn't have no arms. The only thing I had was poetry. So what I started to do in the middle of everything, walk back and forth with these poems, all in Spanish, but I'm going to read you the English version of one of these Spanish poems. I went back and forth poetry, and it actually got them to stop, pay attention to me. The warden walked out with his 2 bodyguards, and that was good. And eventually the guys sat down, and we all ended up having a good time, because that's how things can turn quickly in prison. It could be one moment you think you're going to die, next moment it could be okay. It could go the other way around. So I'm going to read you the poem that I read. I'm going to read it in English, and it's called Piece by Piece. Piece by piece, they tear at you, peeling away layers of being, lying about who you are, speaking for your dreams. In the squalor of their eyes, you are an outlaw, dressing you in a jacket of lies, tailor-made to steal you fit their perfect picture. Take it off, make your own mantle, question their interrogators, eyeball the death in their gaze, say you won't succumb, say you won't believe them when they rename you, say you won't accept their codes, their colors, their putrid morals. Here you have a way, here you can sing victory, here you are not a conquered race, perpetual victim, a sullen face in the thunderstorm. Hands and minds, they are carving out a sanctuary. Use these weapons against them. Use your given gifts. They are not stone.
Thank you. Aisha?
Ooh, I need a moment.
Sorry.
Ooh. So I'm just taking a moment to bask in the vibration of these words. And I am once again reminded that we all live, move, and have our being within this one life, this one love intelligence that goes by 1,000, 100,000 names. But there is only one, and its nature is love. And there is no otherness. It is the one absolute, eternal, omnipresent, omniactive power. And so as I speak this word for this ICUJP community, and as I speak this word for our guest, Luis Rodriguez, I am just so grateful for how this spirit of love moves in, through, and as each one of us. I'm so grateful for that within each person that has said yes to be of service to love. And I know that there is that spirit within each one of us that guides us and directs us into how we best serve, how we best use our gifts and talents to reveal the glory of love in our households, in our communities, in this nation, in this world. For every name that has been lifted up for prayer, I know that right where that person, that family is, the divine love of the Most High is present. The grace of the Holy Spirit is present. And it is having its perfect work right now. And I know that no matter what the appearance, there is the presence and the activity of the Most High that only seeks to reveal love, this kingdom here on earth and in and as each one of us. So for this sacred time together, for the beauty that is weaving itself through all of us, I give thanks. May we all go in peace. And so it is. Amen.
Amen.
Aisha, thank you for that. It's great to see you.
Yeah, thank you. And Luis, I really hope we will see you again. I'm sure Steve wants to say something about that.
I had a great time. Thank you.
Luis, what was the name of the poem about dance or die?
It's called Dance or Die, and it's in my poetry book called Borrowed Bones.
Thank you.